Up next in the broadcast, President Park apologizes for the government's failure to prevent and manage the recent ferry sinking disaster and asks her cabinet to reform the nation's safety standards from square one. Divers brave tough tides and currents to retrieve more bodies from the sunken ferry, which brings the death toll well over the 200 mark. Close to 100 still remain missing. And North Korea conducts live fire drills near the western sea border, to which the government said it would respond if any artillery rounds fall in South Korean territory. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to Primetime News. It's Tuesday, April 29th here in Seoul, and I'm Choi Yu-sun.
I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin with President Park Geun-hye's apology to the nation for the Sewolho ferry accident, where she specifically tried to make amends over the government's poor initial response to the tragedy.
She also vowed to root out social irregularities that are thought to have contributed to the deadly accident and to establish a new safety ministry. Our Park Ji-won has more.
President Park Geun-hye apologized on Tuesday to the public for the ferry disaster that continues to grip the nation. During a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, the president apologized to the people for the government's inability to prevent the accident in the first place and its handling of the situation early on.
이런 사고로 많은 고귀한 생명을 잃게 되어 국민 여러분께 죄송스럽고 마음이 무겁습니다.
She said efforts to find the dozens of victims who remain unaccounted for is the most important task right now. To make sure such an incident doesn't take place again, President Park said she would create a national safety ministry under the Prime Minister's office. Once established, it would systematically and efficiently manage responses to both natural and man-made disasters.
국가 차원의 대형 사고에 대해서는 지휘 체계에 혼선이 발생하지 않도록 총리실에서 직접 관장하면서 부처 간 업무를 총괄, 조정하고 지휘하는 가칭 국가안전처를 신설하려고 합니다.
Earlier in the day, President Park Geun-hye visited the Ansan Memorial Hall, where an altar has been set up for the victims of the ferry accident. She paid her respects to those who lost their lives and spoke to some of their families. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
There's been an outpouring of grief and sadness here in Korea over the Sewolho ferry tragedy that's left more than 300 people dead or missing.
To pay respects to the victims and their families, a large-scale memorial altar opened Tuesday in the city of Ansan to replace the temporary one that was installed last week. Our Ji Myung-gil was on site and spoke to those who paid a visit.
Dressed in black, people line up to remember the victims of the Sewolho tragedy, bowing in front of portraits and weeping. This new memorial hall opened on Tuesday at a park in Ansan City. The venue is 6 times larger than a previous altar in the city. It will stay open 24 hours a day for anyone to pay respects to the Sewolho ferry victims who so tragically lost their lives.
When I saw the portraits of the so many victims, my eyes blurred and I couldn't fight back the tears. I imagined what it would be like if my child was on the ferry. The country needs to take full responsibility for the tragedy.
Many high school students were seen paying tribute at the mass memorial. Nearly 90% of the victims were students from Tanon High School in Ansan City.
The victims were high school students like me, and it breaks my heart to think how frightened and cold they must have been inside the ferry at the time of the accident. They had a whole life ahead of them, and I can't help but think that it could have been me.
The mass memorial hall is run by the government and jointly sponsored by Ansan City and the Gyeonggi-do province. Thousands of people are expected to come to the Ansan Hwarang Memorial Altar to pay respects to the victims. A total of 17 memorial altars have been set up across the nation. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Well, it's been almost 2 weeks since the tragic Sewolho ferry sunk off Korea's southwestern coast of Chindo Island, and the death toll has risen to 205, with 97 still missing and presumed dead.
And for the latest, we're now joined by our Connie Kim here in the studio. Connie, the weather has given rescue divers a hard time in recent days, but they seem to have made some progress today.
Yes, the weather conditions in Chindo seem to have improved, with the clouds clearing out and the waves much calmer compared to yesterday. However, it's a different story altogether under the surface of the water. The currents are stronger with speeds of up to 2.4 meters per second, and to help divers in this hostile environment, the diving bell is currently being prepared for underwater deployment. It was scheduled to be deployed earlier this afternoon, but strong currents have delayed this process. A diving bell is a chamber that can be used as a base for divers, enabling them to stay underwater for about an hour without having to return to the surface. Now, 16 more bodies were recovered today, pushing the death toll over 200, with 97 still unaccounted for. 13 of them were found in the lobby of the 5th floor, with the rest retrieved from the left side of the cabins on the 4th floor. Originally, the cabins on the right side of the vessel on the 3rd and the 4th floor were a priority, but operations expanded to the 5th floor today, working on the assumption that people may have run upstairs from the 4th floor when the water began rushing in. Now, the bodies are yet to be identified, but most are presumed to be Tanon High School students. So far, more than half of the 64 cabins where the missing passengers were presumed to have been searched. Now, the first phase of rescue operations is expected to come to a close by the middle of next month.
And so what about the ongoing criminal investigation? Authorities seem to be casting an even wider net.
Well, the investigation is focused on the crew members that have fled the ship. Now, the cases of the four ferry mates who have been arrested, including the vessel's first mate, known by his last name Kang, will be sent to prosecution. Kang reportedly called his employer, Cheongjin Marine Company, when the vessel was listing, time he should have spent trying to save the ill-fated ferry and its passengers. Kang was also the one responsible for managing the amount of ballast water on the vessel, which is believed to be one of the factors that caused the ferry to capsize. Criticism against the crew who managed to evacuate is likely to expand as phone logs show that the crew, including Captain Lee Jun-seok, called Cheongjin Marine Company 7 times prior to their escape from 9:01 to 9:37, just before final communication was made with the control tower on Chindo Island at 9:39 a.m. Also this morning, the president of the Cheongjin Marine Company, Kim Han-sik, was summoned for the first time. He's being looked at for any links between Yoo Byung-hun, the practical owner of the ferry operator. Investigations are being conducted to determine whether Kim was involved in any business irregularities such as embezzlement and tax evasion in connection with Yoo. Now, an arrest warrant has been issued for 2 members of the Korea Shipping Association who have been under speculation of destroying evidence in relation to the case. They're now suspected of deleting data on their computers or switching PCs. Arrest warrants had been requested against 3 members of the association, but one of them has been dismissed.
All right, Connie, thank you for that update.
My pleasure.
North Korea has ratcheted up tensions on the Korean peninsula this Tuesday afternoon with a round of live fire drills near the de facto inter-Korean maritime border. Hwang Sung-hee has more.
North Korea conducted live fire drills near its disputed western sea border with the South on Tuesday. The exercises, however, were short-lived, lasting just 10 minutes. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the North conducted artillery drills in 2 regions north of the northern limit line in the West Sea, and that none of the 50 artillery shells fired fell in South Korean waters. South Korean residents on 5 nearby border islands were advised to take shelter. Last month, during a similar drill by the North, the 2 Koreas exchanged fire across the maritime border after more than 100 North Korean artillery shells fell into South Korean territory. Expecting such a scenario could occur this time around, President Park Geun-hye had told the South Korean military to respond firmly should any North Korean shells land in South Korean territory. Seoul's defense ministry beefed up its vigilance by dispatching warships and fighter jets to the area. The fire drills come amid Pyongyang's threats of something big and unimaginable for its enemies before April 30th. This on top of a threat it issued last month to conduct a new type of a nuclear test. Experts say a fourth nuclear test could be in the works, as recent satellite imagery has shown increased activity at the regime's nuclear test site. During a visit to Seoul last week, U.S. President Barack Obama warned that another test would only further isolate the North and said that South Korea and the United States stand shoulder to shoulder against any provocation by the North. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now shifting our focus to the economy, Korea posted a current account surplus for the 25th straight month in March on the back of firm auto and computer chip exports. Our Hwang Ji-ae has the details.
March was another bullish month for Korea in terms of its current account surplus. The nation's central bank said Tuesday that the surplus stood at over $7.3 billion last month, up nearly $3 billion from February. Exports of goods rose almost 6% from a year earlier to around $54 billion, helped by strong shipments in automobiles, semiconductors, and telecommunication products. Imports went up slightly more than 3% to $46 billion. The gain in exports, however, came largely from growing demand in advanced economies, with shipments to emerging markets remaining subdued.
Korea's exports aren't dependent on just one or two countries, so the recovery seen in advanced nations like the U.S. and the European Union should spread to emerging economies in order for exports to stay strong.
The nation's current account surplus has been working as a buffer for any potential capital outflow from Korea that might be triggered by the U.S. Federal Reserve's scale back of stimulus measures. The cumulative surplus for the first 3 months stood at over $15 billion. The central bank says the country is on track to meet its surplus projection of $68 billion for all of this year, given that the surplus tends to expand towards the end of the year. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Though the recent rainstorms may have finally brought some fresh spring air, Korea's air quality has not been up to par because of fine dust particles blowing in from China.
And to tell us what can be done on regional and local levels, Professor Lee Hee-kwan from Incheon National University joins us via Skype. Welcome, Professor.
Hi.
Well, at an annual meeting this week, Korea, China, and Japan will have this set of measures to jointly tackle rising concerns over fine dust particles in the region. Can you tell us how effective this set of measures will be?
So far, we have been having some kind of the difficulty to discuss or share the information for those three countries, and there was the biggest hurdle that we have got. But for this meeting, now it's gonna be very important, very the practical milestone to start with those were the discussion.
Professor, how advanced are China and Japan's detection systems and fine dust reducing technologies compared to those of Korea's?
I would say, the level of the air quality monitoring in those three countries is quite similar. And although the Chinese has been improving recently quite a lot, but I would say that those who are monitoring the system in the region is quite reliable to understand or to analyze the air quality status.
Well, since fine dust travels throughout the region, isn't there a need for the three countries to agree to some sort of a pact on restricting their respective fine dust levels?
Definitely. I mean, that is one of the big point to discuss. But rather, I would say it's kind of too early for us to have a discussion like that, because personally, I have visited the Beijing a couple of weeks ago to have a discussion with air quality issue with the university faculties and the department. Obviously, the air quality status in China is way worse than we think. So it is not time for to discuss about any kind of like the legal action. Rather, we would like to have like a more discussion about how we're going to help the Chinese air quality improvement.
So how does this fine dust affect our health?
For the airborne dust, when we inhale it, and then, obviously there is some particle we can inhale it and also the exhale it. But the out of the particle, say we are talking about like a small fine particle less than PM10, meaning that 10 micrometers aerodynamic diameter, and then usually less than 2.5 to 3 micrometer, the airborne fine dust will be staying in our breathing system. It's not going to be very well exhaled yet.
And what can we do in our daily lives to protect ourselves from the effects of fine dust and also to reduce it?
Unfortunately, we haven't got that as many options to reduce the effect from this fine particle. Rather, that we can, to protect ourselves, like the limit for the outdoor activity or doing some personal safety, like wearing mask or some drinking water. But it's not, there's not the practical things to reduce the air pollution is directly at the moment.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your insights.
Sure, thank you.
Time now to check on stories making headlines on the global front, from Western powers imposing new sanctions against Russia to a deadly attack in the heart of Syria. We now go to our Paul Lee at the News Center.
Paul, let's start with the crisis in Ukraine. The United States and the European Union have slapped fresh sanctions against Russia. What is the scope of these new sanctions?
Well, this new package of sanctions targets dozens of key individuals in Russia, but whether they will have a big impact in the situation in Ukraine remains to be seen. The White House said it expanded asset freezes and visa bans to 7 Russian government officials, as well as 17 companies linked to President Putin's inner circle. The European Union also banned 15 more Russian officials from entering the 28-nation bloc and froze their assets as well.
These are people who are responsible for actions against territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty of Ukraine. The Council has just formally adopted this addition, so now on this list of people targeted with assets freeze and travel ban, we have in total 48 names.
Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov called this latest round of sanctions meaningless, shameful, and disgusting. He said Moscow would take retaliatory measures which would, quote, be painfully felt in Washington. And shifting our focus to the Middle East, the international community has condemned an Egyptian court for sentencing hundreds of alleged members of the Muslim Brotherhood to death in a mass ruling yesterday. The latest court order has drawn widespread criticism from the United Nations, United States, and the European Union. They slant it as a major violation of human rights and a grave injustice to those accused. International human rights groups are also criticizing the mass trial, which only lasted a few minutes.
Or, the government would have to prove them, as we say in the United States in criminal cases, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So you have to show evidence. And it sounds to me like if you can convict one person, 500 people or more of injuring or killing one policeman, it's ridiculous.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said he was alarmed by the news and that the verdicts clearly did not meet the basic standards for a fair trial. One human rights advocate called it the largest possible death sentence in recent history. And finally, reports have been coming in of 2 separate attacks in the conflict-torn country of Syria. In just the last hour, government officials say a series of explosions, including a car bomb, ripped through the western city of Homs. At least 37 people have reportedly been killed and 85 are being treated for injuries. Earlier Tuesday, 4 mortar shells struck a mainly Shia neighborhood in central Damascus. According to Syrian state media, 14 were killed in that attack, while scores of others were injured. Police have blamed terrorists for the attacks, but no singular group has yet claimed responsibility. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has also confirmed the incidents and expects the number of fatalities to rise. The attacks come a day after President Bashar al-Assad said he would run for re-election as Syria's civil war continues to extend into its third year. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Lydia Ko is quickly becoming one of golf's biggest names, showing skills way beyond her 17 years. And with her latest win at the Swinging Skirts Classic, she's jumped to number 2 on the world rankings. It's the first major shift at the top since Ko broke into the top 4 in early December. She replaces the injured Suzanne Pedersen, who took over the number 4 spot right under Stacey Lewis. Meanwhile, Park In-bi, who came in at 4th at Swinging Skirts, kept her top ranking for the 55th week in a row. And moving on, new construction for the 2018 Winter Games in Pyeongchang is set to begin next month. And the International Olympic Committee delegation is here in Korea for a 3-day meeting with the organizing committee here to finalize the preparation plans. They'll also inspect the sites for the venues sprawled out across Pyeongchang and nearby Gangneung in Gangwon-do province. Meanwhile, the International Skating Union has tweaked its figure skating judging criteria for the upcoming season. The most striking change can be seen in scoring jumps. A jump's base value will drop to 70% for an error or to 50% for partially rotated spins. The takeoff edge of flips and lutzes will be scrutinized as well. It's being seen as a direct response to the figure skating controversy during the Sochi Winter Games. And shifting to the World Cup, South Korea has confirmed which uniforms players will wear for their 3 group stage matches. Red or white? The Korea Football Association said that the team will wear white for the first and third group stage matches against Russia and Belgium, and red for the second match against Algeria. The red kit was unveiled in late February. The white kit came out earlier this month. Now let's get to Tuesday's top KBO matchup. The Tusan Bears hosted the Nexen Heroes in Jamsil. Now it's Nexen's night versus Tusan's Volstad. Now we fast forward to the top of the 4th. It's 1-1 Lee Sung-yeol. He brings 1 home. Nexen scores 2 total in that inning. It's 3-1. Now Tusan's Heo Kyung-min, he answers back with 1. But Nexen tacks on 2 more in the 5th as Kang Jong-ho and Kim Min-sung come alive, and Nexen goes on to take this one 5-2. And looking at the other games, we have NC beating LG 3-2 and SK making easy work out of Kia 18-5. Meanwhile, Lotte and Hanwha had their game rained out. And that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Chen. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
It has been almost 2 weeks since the tragic ferry accident, and many families are still waiting for the return of their loved ones as rescue efforts slow due to the volatile seas.
For more on conditions on Chindo and elsewhere in the country, we turn things over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung?
Guys, the weather on Chindo continues to stay relatively warm. However, conditions under the sea aren't working in our favor. Today through Friday is when we'll get spring tides, and this is when the speed of tidal currents reach their fastest. At the moment, tidal currents are moving at a rate of about 2.4 meters per second. Now, shifting gears to other parts of the country, the nation is under the influence of a low pressure trough from the waters south of the peninsula. This is why we're seeing heavy clouds and rain.
While heavy rainfall advisories have been issued for some parts of the eastern coastal regions, approximately 20 millimeters of precipitation per hour is falling along this area with a chance of storms. Things will clear up by later tonight in most parts of the country, but those on the eastern coast may want to keep an umbrella handy through Wednesday. Looking ahead at tomorrow's readings, Seoul and Gwangju make it to the low 20s while Daegu and Busan hit the high teens. Moving on to other regions, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang tops out at 16 and 10. Well, that's all the updates for now, and back to you guys.
Thank you, Bo-kyung, and that's our broadcast on this Tuesday night. I'm Chi Yusun in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.